What if the version of yourself you've spent years trying to avoid is actually the one you were meant to grow into? Not the composed version, not the socially refined one, not the version that knows exactly when to smile, when to nod, and how to say "I'm fine" while something deeper feels unsettled. I'm not talking about the dependable you, the agreeable you, the one who learned how to stay balanced, calm, reasonable, and easy to deal with. I'm talking about the part of you that felt like too much, too emotional, too passionate, too driven, too intense, too sensitive, too outspoken, the side of you that made other people uncomfortable, the one you slowly learned to shrink. That self didn't disappear, it didn't vanish, it retreated. And from that hidden place, it has been quietly shaping your life in ways you don't fully see. You believe you're in control. You believe you're choosing your direction. You believe your personality is simply who you are. But what if much of who you think you are is actually who you had to become to feel safe? What if your identity is partly a defense? From early childhood, you started noticing reactions. What brought praise? What brought disapproval? What made people warm toward you? What made them pull away? And without even realizing it, you began adjusting, softening certain traits, hiding certain feelings, amplifying what made you acceptable. You built a social self, a version designed to avoid rejection, to prevent conflict, to guarantee belonging. And over time, you forgot it was a performance. Yet beneath that performance, a quieter truth never stopped existing. You may not hear it clearly, but you feel it, especially in still moments, late at night, in silence, in the pause between distractions, a subtle unease, a faint sense of absence, a question that surfaces when everything else fades. Is this really my life? The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung believed that the deepest psychological suffering doesn't only come from trauma or failure. It comes from inner division, from rejecting parts of ourselves, from labeling certain emotions, impulses, and desires as unacceptable. Not because they truly are, but because we were conditioned to believe they were. Maybe you were taught that anger makes you a bad person, that being outspoken makes you difficult, that wanting more makes you selfish, that showing vulnerability makes you weak. Maybe you learned that standing out is risky, that being different invites rejection, that your natural intensity needed to be toned down. So you adapted. You presented the version that worked, the version that kept things smooth, the version that made other people comfortable. And the rest, you hid it. But what you hide does not disappear. It moves inward. Jung called this hidden psychological territory the shadow. And everything you pushed away lives there. Your shadow holds the parts of you that were never allowed expression. Your anger, your boldness, your sexuality, your deep sensitivity, your fierce ambition, your untamed creativity. Because you didn't bring these traits into conscious awareness, they don't vanish, they operate indirectly. They appear in disguised ways. You procrastinate when you're close to success. You feel anxious without clear reason. You repeat painful relationship patterns. You have emotional reactions that surprise even you. You feel a quiet emptiness you can't explain. You think you're flawed, but you're not flawed. You're fragmented. and no amount of surface-level improvement will heal a divided self. Wholeness doesn't come from becoming better. It comes from becoming whole, from facing what you avoided, from reclaiming what you rejected. As a child, you learned quickly which behaviors earned approval. You were praised for being helpful, encouraged for being calm, rewarded for being easy, and corrected when you were emotional, scolded when you were loud, shamed when you were difficult. So you built a social identity. The responsible one, the quiet one, the achiever, the peacemaker, the strong one. Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to function in society. The persona itself isn't the enemy. It helps us navigate the world. But trouble begins when you forget it's a mask, when you start believing the role is the real you. Deep down, though, something inside resists the illusion. A quiet voice that says, "This isn't all of me." You start filtering your thoughts, policing your emotions, silencing your instincts. You call it maturity. You call it professionalism. You call it being kind. But often, it's self-abandonment. You learn to distrust your impulses, to doubt your desires, to override your inner signals. Approval starts to feel like love. Belonging becomes mistaken for fitting in. Control feels like safety. But consider this. How often do you agree when you actually disagree? How often do you hide frustration behind a smile? How often do you stay silent while something inside you wants to speak? You think you're being strong, but you're becoming invisible. The mask shields you from rejection, but it also blocks real connection, purpose, and vitality. The parts of you that didn't fit into social expectations are not your weaknesses. They are sources of power. Your anger contains your boundaries. Your ambition contains your drive. Your desire contains your aliveness. Your uniqueness contains your originality. What you suppress imprisons you. What you reclaim empowers you. Facing your shadow feels dangerous because you were taught that those parts were dangerous. Fear 1. If I allow my darker impulses, I'll become a bad person. But denying anger doesn't make you gentle. It makes you passive-aggressive. Denying desire doesn't make you pure. It makes you ashamed. What's unconscious controls you. What's conscious becomes choice. Fear 2. If I show my true self, I'll be rejected. Yes, some people may pull away, but when you hide yourself for approval, you reject yourself. Fear 3. If I claim my power, I'll hurt others. Power denied leaks out sideways as resentment or manipulation. Power owned becomes clarity and boundaries. Fear 4. I don't know who I am without my mask. This is the ego's greatest fear. Individuation requires the death of the false identity. But what feels like loss is actually emergence. Modern culture sells self-discovery as a pleasant journey. Jung understood it as a dismantling. Individuation is not about adding qualities. It's about removing illusions. It often begins in crisis, burnout, breakdown, a sense that your life no longer fits. This is not failure. It's the psyche demanding integration. Dreams become vivid. Emotions intensify. Old memories return. It feels chaotic, but it's a reorganization of the self. You let go of the false identity, so the real one can emerge. Understanding these ideas isn't enough. Integration requires lived experience. Notice what qualities in others strongly trigger you. They often reflect rejected parts of yourself. Engage in reflective journaling. Dialogue internally with the parts you avoid. Practice small acts of authenticity. Say no when you mean no. Speak truth gently but clearly. Allow yourself to create without purpose. Symbolically release roles you've outgrown. Write a letter to the old identity and let it go. Each step returns energy that was used to maintain the mask. That energy becomes vitality, and vitality changes everything. There comes a moment in this process that feels deeply disorienting. It's the moment when the identity you've relied on for years starts to feel unfamiliar. The roles that once felt solid begin to loosen. The things that once defined you don't seem to fit the same way anymore. You might look at your own behavior and think, why am I reacting differently? Why do I suddenly feel restless in situations that used to feel normal? Why does my old life feel smaller than it used to? This is not a mistake. This is not regression. This is not you losing yourself. This is you outgrowing a false self. For a long time, your persona gave you structure. It helped you navigate relationships, work, family expectations, and social environments. It gave you a script to follow. It made life predictable. But predictability is not the same as authenticity. And when your deeper self begins to rise, predictability starts to crumble. You may feel less tolerant of things you once accepted, less willing to compromise your truth, less interested in maintaining appearances. This can create tension. People who were comfortable with the old version of you may feel unsettled. They might say you've changed. They might say you're being dramatic, selfish, or difficult. But often, what they're really reacting to is the fact that you're no longer playing the same role in their story. And that can be threatening, not because you are wrong, but because your growth disrupts familiar dynamics. Growth always rearranges relationships. Some will deepen, some will fade, some will resist. This is part of individuation. As Carl Jung understood, becoming whole doesn't mean becoming universally liked. It means becoming internally aligned. There is a quiet battle that happens during this stage. On one side is comfort, the known version of yourself, the predictable patterns, the roles that keep everything stable. On the other side is truth, the emerging self that feels more real, but also more uncertain. Comfort says, go back to how things were. Don't rock the boat. Don't make it harder. Truth says, you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you now know about yourself. This tension can feel exhausting. You may question yourself. You may wonder if you're imagining things. You may feel tempted to shrink back into the familiar version of yourself. And sometimes you will. You'll slip into old patterns. You'll people please again. You'll silence yourself again. This doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're human. Integration is not a straight line. It's a spiral. You revisit the same themes again and again, each time with more awareness. The difference now is that when you abandon yourself, you feel it more clearly. The discomfort is sharper. The dissonance is louder. That discomfort is not punishment. It's guidance. It's your psyche saying, "This no longer fits who you are becoming." As you continue this process, something powerful begins to happen. You start recognizing that many of the traits you rejected weren't flaws at all. They were strengths that had no safe outlet. Your anger, when conscious, becomes clarity about your limits. Your ambition, when owned, becomes vision and direction. Your sensitivity, when accepted, becomes empathy and depth. Your intensity, when integrated, becomes presence and vitality. These qualities were never meant to disappear. They were meant to be refined, not erased. When they lived in the shadow, they felt dangerous and overwhelming. But when you bring them into awareness, you can relate to them differently. You can choose how to express them. You can shape them rather than be driven by them unconsciously. This is the difference between being possessed by your shadow and being in dialogue with it. Possession feels like loss of control. Dialogue feels like partnership. You begin to see that your shadow is not your enemy. It is a reservoir of life energy that was forced underground. As you integrate it, you don't become darker. You become more alive. One of the most important skills in this journey is learning to stay present with your inner experience instead of immediately trying to fix, suppress, or escape it. When anger arises, instead of judging it, you become curious. When sadness appears, instead of pushing it away, you allow it to move through you. When desire surfaces, instead of shaming it, you ask what it's pointing toward. This requires courage, because staying with yourself means feeling what you've spent years avoiding. But the more you do this, the less frightening your inner world becomes. You realize that emotions are not threats, they are signals. You learn that intensity doesn't destroy you. Avoidance does. Gradually, you build a deeper trust in yourself, not because you're always calm or controlled, but because you know you can face whatever arises inside you. This inner trust is the foundation of real confidence, not the confidence that comes from performance, but the confidence that comes from self-acceptance. As this inner alignment grows, your external life begins to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. You make choices that feel more honest, even if they're less convenient. You speak with more clarity, even if it creates temporary discomfort. You pursue what feels meaningful, even if it doesn't impress everyone. Life may look less polished from the outside, but from the inside, it feels more coherent. You are no longer living primarily to maintain an image. You are living to express a truth. This is the essence of individuation, not becoming someone new, but becoming more fully yourself. And that self is not perfect. It is complex, contradictory, capable of light and shadow. But it is real. And living as a real person, rather than a role, brings a depth of fulfillment that no amount of approval can replace. At first, life feels less tidy. You feel more deeply. You become less predictable. You stop automatically playing roles. Some people drift away. Others come closer. You become less reactive, more grounded, more alive. You laugh more freely. You speak more honestly. You love more fully. You still face challenges, but now you face them as your real self. You are becoming the person you once feared being. And that is not a problem. That is liberation. So now ask yourself, what part of you have you been afraid to accept? Your anger, your ambition, your sensitivity, your intensity. Share it in the comments. This is a space for honesty, not performance. Your truth may help someone else feel less alone. And if this exploration of the psyche resonated with you, if you're ready to go deeper into shadow work, psychological strength, and inner mastery, subscribe to our channel, Inner Dominion. This is where we confront the unconscious, reclaim our power, and step into wholeness. Your real self is waiting. We'll see you in the next video.